One night in March 1945, the capital of an empire woke to a new kind of storm. Not thunder, not bombs that cracked once and went silent. This was a steady roar, like wind through a giant furnace, building street by street until the air itself seemed to burn. By dawn, whole neighborhoods were gone. Tonight, we ask a hard question with a clear answer by the end of this series. What made that night so destructive? And did it truly change the course of the war? Picture Tokyo before the flames, a living maze of wood and paper, narrow lanes, small yards, workshops tucked into homes, metalworking in one house, sewing in the next, a parts finisher across the alley. This was Japan's strength, thousands of tiny shops feeding the war machine with fittings, brackets, instruments, and uniforms. It also made the city a single, connected fuse. If a fire ran, it would not find empty stone and brick. It would find tinder, roofs that could be punctured, walls that could catch, and rooms packed with the materials of work and life. The people knew fire. Tokyo had seen it before, after earthquakes and lightning strikes. But war changes scale. Water towers and hoses help when a block is burning. They do not help when a district burns on purpose, with weather and timing designed to feed the flames. That is the difference between a tragic fire and what the world saw in 1945. A fire made into a weapon. Step back to the islands that made the weapon possible. In the summer of 1944, the United States fought across the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and built vast airfields on coral and crushed rock. From these runways, a new machine could reach Japan's home islands, the B-29 Superfortress. Long wings, pressurized cabin, remote-controlled guns. A bomb bay that seemed to swallow the crew walkway. On paper, the plan was simple and clean. Fly high in daylight, use precision bomb sites, hit factories, rails, docks. The B-29 was built to do this. Then the sky said no. Over Japan, the air at bomber altitudes moved like a fast river, the high-level winds we now call the jet stream. Pilots met headwinds strong enough to break fuel plans and crosswinds that shoved bomb patterns far from the aim point. Crews who practiced neat geometry over Kansas watched it fall apart over Tokyo and Nagoya. Bombs fell where the wind wanted. Mission after mission brought high risk and low results. The men in the air felt it. The people on the ground saw it. And the planners had to admit the truth. The doctrine that worked in Europe would not work the same way here. This is where one man, and a set of hard choices, changed the war in the air. General Curtis LeMay was blunt, analytical, and unsentimental about methods that did not deliver. He studied the winds, the fuel curves, the way Japanese night defenses worked, the way fires behaved in packed wooden districts. He asked a simple question. If the air up high ruins accuracy, why stay up there? What if the bombers came in low, at night, spread out, each crew making an individual run instead of tight formations? What if they carried not heavy high-explosive bombs meant to punch concrete, but canisters designed to bite into thin roofs, burst inside rooms, and throw fire into the bones of a house? It sounds obvious in hindsight. In early 1945, it was radical. Flying heavy bombers low at night over a capital city meant trusting speed, darkness, and surprise more than armor and altitude. It meant accepting that most defensive guns were extra weight at low level. Many crews would keep the tail guns for last-ditch defense and leave the rest behind to make room for more fuel and more fire. It meant telling trained precision crews to bomb by eye and radar through smoke, not by neat math from 30,000 feet. It meant targeting not one big factory, but the web of small workshops hidden in homes, because that was the true production line. The weapon for this new plan was brutally simple. Picture a metal canister that splits in the air and drops dozens of small bomblets, M69s, each designed to punch through a thin roof, wait a breath, then spray burning jellied gasoline inside a room. One canister scatters flame across a row of houses. Hundreds of canisters, across blocks, can turn scattered fires into a single field of heat. And heat, in a wooden city, is a force all its own. To make that heat start where it would run best, the plan used pathfinders, lead crews trained to mark the first target lines. They would arrive early, pick the district where small shops were thickest, and carve a pattern in fire. For Tokyo, that meant the east side lowlands, the Shitamachi, crowded neighborhoods where homes and workshops sat close, with canals, markets, temples, schools, and sheds packed into tight grids. Once the first lines burned bright, the rest of the bomber stream would aim by that glow. Not one perfect point, a broad, deliberate swath. Think through the logic. Low altitude defeats the worst of the jet stream. Night reduces the bite of fighters. Spreading the force over a wide area makes flak less focused. Wooden roofs let M69s in. Neighborhood workshops guarantee that burning homes also burn war work, gears, gauges, uniforms, packing crates, the thousands of small things that keep airplanes and ships in motion. Fire does the rest. It leaps across alleys. It rides wind. It frees embers to drift and land blocks away. Once enough of those tiny bombs are placed, the city starts to help the fire, feeding it with oxygen, rafters, tatami, paper screens, workbenches, even the tools themselves. There is one more thing most people do not think about: sound. At low level, the B-29 is not a distant thunder. It is a front-row noise. Engines pulse. The slipstream hisses. When canisters open, crews hear a clatter, then a strange quiet as the bomblets fall. Down below, people hear the bomblets hit roofs like handfuls of stones, then the deep crackle of many small fires turning into one large one. LeMay's plan counted on speed and the enemy's surprise. By the time the pattern was clear, the second and third waves would already be feeding it. The crews prepared for this shift with checklists that felt almost backwards: less gun weight, more incendiaries. Fuel balanced for low-level drag, not high-altitude economy. Briefings focused on approach headings, altitudes, and how to ride the hot updrafts that fires throw into the sky. Navigators studied city maps and canal lines, because in smoke those dark ribbons and the wide river could be the only landmarks still visible. Pilots practiced shallow approaches and quick egresses, no climbing to 20,000 feet under a rising fire column. If tossed around by heat, hold steady enough to release, then get out. On the ground, Tokyo's defenses were brave but brittle for this kind of attack. There were fighters, there was flak, there were fire breaks cut through the city after past disasters. But the system was built for raids that came high, slow, and small. It was not built for many heavy bombers at low altitude, each making its own run, spreading fire across whole wards at once. Bucket brigades, neighborhood pumps, even water mains could help against a block-sized blaze. They could not keep up when the fire arrived in hundreds of places in minutes. This is the harsh arithmetic of urban war in 1945. If a city's industry lives inside its homes, the boundary between civilian space and war space blurs. That is not a defense of what came next. It is an explanation of the thinking that shaped it. Everyone involved knew the stakes. Everyone knew what wood and paper do in a dry March wind. And still, the orders went out. The last details fell into place in the late winter briefings. Approach from the Marianas. Use darkness. Keep altitudes low. High enough to avoid wires and towers. Low enough to punch through the wind. Pathfinders mark an X through the Shitamachi to give the following crews a visual target even if smoke builds fast. Each aircraft finds its slot in the stream, drops on time, and clears out on the planned heading. If visibility fails, switch to radar to place canisters into the marked box. Do not circle. Do not bunch up. Keep the pattern moving. Why this much discipline for an attack that seems chaotic? Because fire is a chain reaction, and chain reactions need timing. If the first wave lights the fuse, the second and third waves must arrive before the first burns out or firefighters organize. If they do, multiple lines of flame join. Heat jumps. Roofs ignite without a direct hit. Air currents feed the core. The fire stops being many small events and becomes one large weather system. That is the moment a city cannot easily fight. Listen carefully as we close this setup, because it carries our theme forward. War often looks like a contest of hardware. Bigger guns, faster planes, thicker armor. But again and again, the edge comes from understanding the environment better than your enemy. In Tokyo, the environment was not just the sky and the wind. It was the city itself, its materials, its layout, its work patterns, its daily life. LeMay's gamble was to use all of that against Japan in a single night. You do not have to admire the man to see the cold logic in the plan. Change altitude, change time, change weapons, change the shape of the target. From one factory to an entire industrial web. Accept new risks to reduce old ones. Trade precision for mass effects. And above all, accept that in a wooden capital, the most powerful explosive is not blast. It is heat. That is part one. We have built the stage, the bases that put bombers within reach, the jet stream that broke the first plan. The tactical shift that embraced night, low level, and fire. The loadout, E-46 clusters and M69 bomblets, meant to turn roofs into chimneys, and the choice of Shitamachi, where war work and home life were closest together. The plan is set. Now watch what happens when 300 superfortresses fly into a sleeping capital. Night falls over the Marianas like a heavy curtain, and the runways glow in long, straight lines. Ground crews move in practiced rhythms, hoses, chocks, hand signals, while the big silver bombers sit with their tails low and their noses pointed west. Engines cough, then catch, one after another, until the air itself vibrates. Every crew knows the trade they made tonight: less gun weight, more fuel, and a belly full of fire instead of high explosive. They are not flying the textbook mission from training films. They are flying a new plan built for this one country, this one city, this one night. Taxi lights bob along coral strips cut into islands with names that already feel like stations on a railway: Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Inside each B-29, the checklist snaps forward. Mixtures set. Boost on. Turbos spooled but tamed. Low level needs different habits. The navigator runs a finger along a paper map marked with fixes and headings, then taps the radar hood where Tokyo Bay will become a bright shape if smoke smothers the stars. The bombardier checks the intervals on the incendiary canisters, clusters that will open like iron flowers in the slipstream, and scatter M69 bomblets that can bite a roof and ignite a room from the inside out. The pilot rolls to the line, glances at the co-pilot, and pushes the throttles. The superfortress does not leap. It commits, heavy and deliberate, until the island falls away and the sea takes over. Radio discipline is strict. The stream forms without chatter, each ship climbing only as much as needed, not to the safe blue of the world altitude, but to a hard practical band where the jet stream won't tear patterns apart. You can feel the difference in your chest. At 20 or 30,000 feet, a bomber lives in cold math. Down here, it feels the weather. It feels the bumps. It feels alive. The crews ride that air, save fuel they would have lost to headwinds, and keep the formation loose enough that one mistake won't cascade. Hours pass in measured checks. Engine temps, fuel balances, oxygen when needed, a quiet word from the tail about a glint that fades. Over black water and scattered cloud, the bomber stream slides toward Honshu. Japan announces itself the way any coastline does at night, first as a smudge, then as a suggestion of lights, then as an idea. Bays, inlets, rivers, the geometry of human living. Tonight, geometry is the point. The target is not a single dot on a map. It is a box of neighborhoods where homes and workshops overlap so completely that destroying one injures the other. That is the web you can cut with fire. The Pathfinders go first. They aim for the lowlands east of the Imperial Palace, the Shitamachi, the old city, crowded and flat, packed with houses and small shops, cut by canals and narrow streets that feed wind like bellows. Their job is to turn a dark city into a visible guide. On the approach, they pick up anchors that even smoke cannot hide: the river, the curve of the bay, the outline of larger avenues. Then they do something simple and terrible. They draw fire across the map. A long burning line, then another crossing it. An X that says to every following crew, "Here, aim into this." It is both a marker and a fuse. It will show the way, and it will start the chain reaction. Behind them, the main force arrives in a timed wave. Some bombers can still see the canals and the landmarks between buildings. Others see only a stitched glow where the Pathfinders have begun their work. The bombardier calls the run. The pilot holds the nose steady against the bumps. The airplane hums as if it were breathing. When the canisters release, there's a shiver in the airframe, a lightness. Then the sound changes. Down below, the bomblets hit roofs like a scatter of thrown stones, and a heartbeat later, each one becomes a wick. Fire does not roar at first. It whispers. It finds the corners of rooms. It crawls along ceiling beams and paper screens. Then a gust takes it, and it shows its real size. From the ground, the sky now looks stitched with sparks that fall in slow arcs and land where streets meet. From the air, black becomes a patterned orange. Points, then patches, then sheets. The crew can feel the heat begin to speak through the fuselage, a hand pressing up from the city. They are low enough to sense the updrafts, low enough for the glow on aluminum to flicker in the pilot's peripheral vision as he holds the aircraft level for the last seconds of the drop. When they clear the target and turn for the egress, they pass through warm, choppy air that smells faintly of something sweet and wrong. Varnish and fabric and the insides of houses. More aircraft, more drops. scattered fires begin to join. A lane of houses goes, then the lane behind it, then the shed that connects them. Ember storms lift and travel, finding the dry eaves of a block that thought it was spared. Somewhere, a crewman in a different B-29 watches a line of small flames run together like beads and become one shape that breathes. This is where the plan shows its brutal physics. Heat makes air rise. Rising air pulls fresh oxygen in from the sides. Wind that would have wandered through alleys now feeds the core. The city has made its own weather. Updrafts start to toss bombers on final like boats crossing a wake. Pilots keep hands light but firm on the yoke, riding the bumps, refusing the instinct to climb away before the interval is correct. The bombardier calls, on, now, and the load goes. In the seconds after release, as the aircraft noses up to leave, the pilot can feel the hot river behind him, a living thing that wants to pull the tail down and keep him near the heat. Some crews will talk later about watching sparks pass their windows at an angle that didn't make sense until they remembered. The air itself was moving upward. On the ground, fire breaks carved after past disasters begin to fail their promise. A strip of empty land can stop flames when the wind is gentle and embers are few, but a fire that breathes like a machine throws brands across gaps and uses its own wind to push them farther. A canal works until floating fuel and debris catch, and bridges become chimneys, drawing heat under their spans. Firefighters do everything men can do. They pivot hoses, they form buckets lines, they cut ad hoc breaks where there is still time. But the map is against them. The very density that let people live and work close together now gives the blaze 1,000 paths and 1,000 hands to feed it. Inside the stream, the sense of time changes. Runs feel long and too short at once. You can stare at a bright knot in the city and, for a second, forget there are altitudes to hold, headings to make, other aircraft somewhere near you doing the same hard job in the same narrow layer of sky. The interphone stays disciplined. Short calls. Confirmations. A quick curse when a bump knocks a sight picture loose. Then a calm reset. A glance at the fuel board. Another at the cylinder heads. You do not think in grand ideas up here. You think in the next 6 minutes. Then the 6 after that. Those minutes are where people sometimes imagine the defenders more clearly than the defenders could see themselves. There are night fighters in the dark, some guided, some hunting by instinct, but the attack's shape denies them certainty. There is flak, batteries firing by sound and radar when they can, but smoke and glow play tricks on depth and azimuth. A bomber coming in alone at low level does not present the same neat target as a stacked daylight box. The chaos that terrifies on the ground also confuses in the air. It does not make the sky safe. It makes it uneven. A searchlight finds a ship for a panicked moment. A burst walks close enough that fragments tick the skin. Then both are gone in smoke, and the pilot is back to the instruments and the dim red light on the faces he trusts. Some aircraft are hit and keep flying. Some turn away for home early with an engine that runs rough or a wing that leaks. A few are lost, disappearing into the smoke, failing over the bay, or limping out to sea and never reporting in. A man at a plotting board in the Marianas will add a grease pencil mark and hope it turns into a check-in later. For most of the stream, though, the mission moves like a tide. The Pathfinder's X has become a cross of living heat. The following waves have filled the box it framed, and the city below has started to feed the fire faster than any hose can starve it. By the last hour of the attack, the difference between target and reference blurs. Bombers that expected to bomb visually now switch to radar to place their loads into the right rectangle of glow and shadow, because there are no single features left to see. Just a horizon of light, a black slash where the river used to be a guide, and the conscience-pricking knowledge that somewhere in that geometry, people are moving. The crews keep to their brief, steady in, steady out, not from coldness, but because the worst thing now would be to improvise in a sky full of strangers and heat. Through it all runs a sound the crews will remember as much as the heat. The engine's steady chant. It is the one constant in a night designed to turn constants into questions. As long as the chant holds, there is a way home. The pilot feels it in his palms. The flight engineer hears it as a score, ready to catch a missed note. When the last canisters fall and the nose swings to the outbound heading, relief is not a cheer. It is a breath you didn't know you were holding. The city does not exhale with you. It inhales harder. Fires that began as points are now plains. Broad surfaces of flame rolling down streets, entering courtyards, climbing temple eaves, leaping across alleys. The updrafts that rocked the bombers grow taller, their edges ragged with sparks. Somewhere, a row of firefighters stands on a canal bank, faces hot enough to sting even through wet cloth, watching a wall of heat bend the air as if the world were made of glass and someone were pushing on it. Somewhere else, families move toward bridges and open spaces because the instinct to find water and sky is older than any city. Out over the bay, the first returning aircraft gather into a looser, safer rhythm, checking in by call sign when protocol allows, counting engines, counting friends. The crews are tired in the specific way people are tired after doing the exact thing they trained to do while knowing exactly what it meant. There is pride in execution and a weight that doesn't have a name yet. Back over Tokyo, the markers that began the night as tools of aim have become something else. They are borders now, edges of an event that will not be truly measured until morning. The bombers that remain on station for late drops make their runs with a focus that feels like narrowness. The ones outbound count miles to the water and feel the air cool. By dawn, neighborhoods are ash, and the numbers are hard to believe. Dawn comes late to a burned city. Smoke holds the light and turns it gray, and what used to be familiar streets now look like sketches rubbed out by a giant hand. From above, you would measure the damage in clean numbers, square miles, blocks, bridges. On the ground, it feels like something larger, a map that no longer matches the world. By morning, more than a dozen square miles of Tokyo are gone, districts flattened into a continuous field of ash and twisted metal. Whole wards are missing. Fire breaks that once looked wide now read as thin pencil lines across a charred page. Where houses and small workshops stood shoulder to shoulder, you see only foundations and chimneys, neat rectangles with nothing inside them. This is what the phrase industrial web means when it touches reality. It is not a single big factory with a name on a gate. It is the countless little shops that lived inside neighborhoods. A lathe in a back room turning small bushings, a family team riveting buckles, a shop cutting gaskets, a man who polishes instrument glass at a bench in his kitchen. War work hid in plain sight, braided into daily life. When fire took the houses, it also took the tools, the jigs, the benches, the stockpiles, the know-how that moves across a street by habit. In one night, that web frayed and snapped across an area so large that fire crews could not even trace the edge of it. And because the web was made of people, not just materials, its loss did not stop at buildings. It reached into families, skills, and small routines that kept bigger machines moving. In the silence after the roar, the city counts people. The numbers will never agree exactly. Any disaster of this size turns records into guesses. Many families were never found. Many names never matched to remains. That is why historians talk in ranges. Tens of thousands died in a single night. Many more were injured. Close to 1 million were left without homes. If you stand where the canals meet, you can picture scenes that repeat across the city. Families who ran for open water because open water had saved people before. Crowds on bridgeheads where the heat bent the air and made it hard to breathe. Lines of firefighters who turned their faces from the flames to shield their eyes and then turned back to keep the hoses moving until the hoses ran dry. At some points, fire breaks in rivers did what they were meant to do. At others, wind carried embers over and around them, and a safe place became a trap in minutes. The first full morning is a study in contrast. In some neighborhoods, the fire simply starved itself and lay down, leaving a low, steady glow that you could walk through. In others, cellars still hiss, and the steel frames of streetcars hold heat like stoves. People search by habit. Here was the corner store. Here was the shrine. Here was the little yard where a family grew beans. That anchor is gone, but the memory of the map remains, and you see them following it with their eyes, trying to match what they know to what they see. The city has lost more than space. It has lost bearings. The raid on Tokyo did not stand alone. It was the first in a rapid series that spread the same logic. Low, at night, with fire, across other major cities. Nagoya felt it next. Osaka, Kobe. Over roughly 10 days after Tokyo, bomber wings flew wave after wave, dropping thousands more tons of incendiaries. Each target had its own layout, its own winds and waterways, but the results were painfully similar. Wide burned footprints, broken housing, and the collapse of the tiny supply chains that fed Japan's larger plants. By spring and early summer, more than 60 cities were hit in some form, and the cumulative effect on industry and daily life was plain even to people far from the capitals. Evacuations gathered pace. Families sent children out. Black markets grew because official channels could not keep up. Trains ran, but where were they going, and what would they carry back? Now we face the question that sits at the center of any honest account of this night. Did it shorten the war? In military terms, the answer points in one direction. The fire raid struck at exactly what Japan could least afford to lose: the distributed workshops that made crucial small parts, the housing for workers, the roads and rails that moved handmade goods to assembly plants. Production fell, repair work slowed. Morale took a visible hit, not only because of fear, but because the state could not pretend the capital was safe anymore, and the fire campaign did not work alone. At sea, mine-laying choked coastal shipping and starved industry of coal and food. From April, long-range fighters escorting bombers from Iwo Jima further cut Japan's options. By summer, the country faced hunger, a wrecked transport system, and a home defense force stretched thin. In August came the atomic bombs and the Soviet entry into the war, shocks that pushed leaders to the edge and then over it. Seen in that chain, the March firebombing is a major link. But a second truth sits beside it, and we should say it clearly. The method was brutal, and its main victims were civilians living inside a war economy they did not control. If you define the city as a factory because war work lives in its houses, you erase boundaries that many people want to keep. Even in 1945, some airmen, sailors, soldiers, and civilians argued over where necessity ends and cruelty begins. After the war, that debate did not go away. It deepened. It is the debate you hear when people ask whether a shorter war always justifies a harder night, and who gets to make that trade. Walking through the ruins the day after, you would not see strategy. You would see what people saved because it could be carried. A kettle, a family registry book, a photograph that somehow did not burn. You would see work crews trying to clear roads wide enough for carts and pumps. You would see lines for water and rice. You would see children watch the adults to learn how to move in a city without walls. And you would see quiet, too much of it, where there used to be the layered sound of a living place. Tokyo has not forgotten March 10th. The date appears every year in speeches and small ceremonies. Survivors' accounts have been recorded, so their voices do not end with them. In certain wards, small museums and memorials keep artifacts that do not look like war trophies at all. A melted bicycle frame, a charred mailbox, a clock stopped at an hour that means nothing until you know what happened that night. These are not exhibits of victory. They are reminders of cost. If you live in the city today, you can still walk the riverbanks and the rebuilt streets and sense how the modern grid sits on top of an older one, how memory is layered into the new foundations. So what does it mean? Maybe this: when nations weave their war work into the daily life of their cities, they make those cities part of the battlefield, whether anyone wants that or not. And when air forces plan to burn neighborhoods because neighborhoods contain workshops, they accept that civilians will pay in numbers too large for one line on a screen. The men who flew that night did their duty under orders shaped by a logic that prized results over method. Many of them would later carry the weight of what they saw: the heat below, the glow on the wings, the knowledge that accuracy was measured by area, not by a dot. We close this chapter with a simple, hard picture. On the morning after, the smoke thins and the sun finally reaches the ground. People step across narrow ditches now full of ash. Somewhere, a bell that did not melt rings because someone needs to hear it. Somewhere else, silence says more. The war will go on for months. Mines in the sea lanes, more raids, hunger, the last defenses, the final shock of August. But for many in Tokyo, this was the day they understood that the center could not hold. Not because the palace would fall, but because the city around it already had. If you want us to go deeper, how the wider incendiary offensive unfolded across dozens of cities, how the M69 was designed and tested, how airmen and civilians told their stories after the war, tell us below. We can build a part 4 that follows the fire beyond Tokyo, and a companion episode on the science of urban burning and the ethics that still divide historians today.